You are now listening to the Building with AI Promises and Heartbreaks podcast, brought to you by Solid.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Building with AI Promises and Heartbreaks. Today I have with me Lindsay King. Hello, Lindsay.
Hi, Yoni. How you doing?
Good. Thank you for being here with us. Lindsay, would you like to give the audience a bit of background about yourself?
Yeah. So I'm probably a bit different than most of your guests on this podcast. I am
Sure.
a consumer-facing marketer. I've been a marketer for about 15 years now. My career spans both agency side, so advertising, and then in-house working on some of the world's major consumer tech brands. I did a stint at Uber. I'm currently at Instacart. And prior to Instacart, I actually worked for a hot second in B2B SaaS in data observability. So that is really where my passion for data and my interest in data really grew. Didn't think I was going to get into the weeds of all of the technical infrastructure, but really fell in love with the modern data stack, surprisingly. So happy to be here.
No, fantastic. Good to have you here. So let's start with maybe, brand marketing. It's, this is 2026. AI is everywhere. Data is everywhere. Feels like, you're getting chased by ads and on your TV, on your phone, when you're driving down the road, maybe even your car. Some cars have ads now. So maybe share with us a bit, how does brand marketing look like today? What causes me to use the Uber app or the Instacart app versus others, and how does brand marketing sort of fit into that?
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to set a framework by kind of backing up for a second and explaining what we could think of as like the two major buckets of marketing. And I think we've heard about them,
Mhm.
especially in Silicon Valley, for a very long time. We've heard about performance marketing, we've heard about brand marketing.
Mhm.
Performance marketing you can think of as like direct response on channels like Meta, Instagram, for example. With ad plays, you might think of that as like some SEO, but really the idea is that you're putting messages into pipelines to get a direct response from consumers, mostly looking to drive immediate conversion. So you're converting
Mhm.
consumers that are already in market most of the time. Brand marketing works a little bit higher up in the funnel. So what we're really trying to do is to make you aware of a brand or a product or a service, and then convert that awareness into adoption and usage. So brand marketing is really about controlling the perception of the product and the service, and then hopefully getting that in front of the right audience so that they're encouraged downstream to want to use your product or service. Does that make sense as a general framework?
It does. So basically, if I'm on a website or something and there's an ad, or on playing Candy Crush, and there's an ad and I click on it,
Yep.
and I buy something, there's full traction for that, right? They know, oh, we spent, $1.50 on the ad. You only clicked on it. He bought something on the website, it's trackable. Whereas brand is higher level, and oftentimes before you're even looking to do something specific, it's for you to recognize that brand. Uh, Now, you've been in this space for 14 years making creative decisions. For example, the specific content of an ad, or let's say Super Bowl, because Super Bowl is obviously the big thing. So, the content of a 30-second Super Bowl ad that is there for you to recognize the brand later when you're thinking about something. So, how are things evolved over the last 14 years since you started doing the brand marketing till today? Has it changed dramatically, or is it still, you know, largely the same, and we're thinking about, okay, what would people respond to? How does it work?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think there are some things that might have changed, and there are others that are still essentially the same. So, uh, when you're going out on a big brand campaign, you usually have a couple of core objectives. Those objectives usually have to do with the way that the brand is perceived. And we call that measurement on the brand marketing side. There's a couple different terms. Companies tend to measure brand health, is what we call it, a little bit differently. But essentially, you're looking at like brand equity, like how recognizable and famous is our brand? Do people know us, essentially? The second is like favorability. Are they favorable to us? So, like, if we go out into the market and they know who we are, do they think well of us, basically? And obviously, that's going to translate downstream, at least we hope so, into purchases and like conversion down the
Mhm.
road. I think what is so interesting to me is that the speed at which marketers need to shift to market conditions and to shifting audiences has only gotten faster, number one. And number
Mhm.
two, there's some pretty intense fragmentation in terms of audiences. I think social media has really driven a lot of fragmentation and a shift from mass market culture to maybe more subcultures. And so that makes it tricky for marketers to respond at speed. And traditionally, brand marketing is a little bit of a slower moving engine. And so adapting to that speed is an area where I think we're going to have to reinvent and think through many different things in the years to come, especially as AI speeds up the production aspect of a
Hmm.
campaign. So right now, I think everyone is pretty aware. If you break down marketing to first principles, it's like, okay, I need to get in front of a specific audience. There are channels in which I do that. The channels are the pipes. So how do I create content or assets that I put in those pipes and I get in front of an audience? It's the very basic fundamental first principles. What AI is currently doing is speeding up the rate at which you can put content into those pipes. But that's first order effect. We're not even talking about secondary yet. So there's so much we could dig into. We can go in many different directions here.
Which we will. So what you're saying is, okay, now anybody can create any ad they want. There's if I'm responsible for a shoe brand, I can do whatever ad I want for that shoe. I think there was even a company recently that did their entire campaign for the shoe without any of the photos being real. They were all AI generated. So now you can produce all this content, but how do you know what works? So when you're trying to make a decision about the creation of content, how do you decide what content, what pipe to put it in, what's going to perform? How do you measure the results? Even before AI in the picture, how does all that work?
Yeah, so it functions a little bit differently based on those two buckets that I described to you. Obviously, I'll
Hmm.
start with performance marketing because I think it's one of the easiest ones to understand from like a mental
Yeah.
framework perspective. I think those are channels in which channel specialists, it's really easy to iterate rapidly with AI because what you're doing is basically variant testing. You're going to be testing different versions of creative to see what's going to drive the most immediate conversion and click. That's pretty
Hmm.
easy and I'd say accessible to marketers right now as they put in the proper like technology stacks, right? I think brand marketing is where it gets harder because those briefs and those work streams, when you get to the very top of the work stream, there is always a moment where the marketer actually has to create a strategic brief. That strategic brief has to answer, again, what consumer am I going to be speaking to? What makes this the right moment to do it contextually? What is the message that I'm going to use to market my product to them? Is that message going to resonate? And then what comes downstream is that creative execution. So there's a whole lot of inputs upstream in a strategy before you ever get to the creative. Once you get into the creative, you're usually briefing in an agency, especially if you're looking at a very high level national campaign like a Super Bowl.
Hmm.
Super Bowl is
Hmm.
going to easily run you something like 20 million. They are not cheap. So you're making a very big, bold bet based on a strategic brief and the creative direction that you're deciding to then go and execute. And again, AI is speeding up um, that production for a large scale campaign like that, but you're still having to make a judgment call based on taste about what you think is going to get you the result that you want to see as a marketer based on your brief. So there's still a lot that is more, I'd say, art than science there.
Yeah. Yeah, because I immediately think, how do you justify the cost? Why spend $20 million on a campaign? Why not spend 1 million? Why not spend 50 million? How do you go about doing that? How do you justify, we'll spend this much? Or, you said you're going to target certain audience and you think this is what they're going to respond to. How do you justify that? Other than obviously your experience, what else do you use?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're working in a modern company, you're working with data science. So you're also coming
Mhm.
into your briefing trying to understand, okay, what are my KPIs and objectives? What kind of lift am I hoping to see? How can we model that out? And based on that modeling, then you're thinking about, okay, if I need to reach, I'm making this up, 10 million people in order to see the lift that I've projected into, what does that represent in media spend? And there you're working typically with either your in house channel partners or your media agency to determine the media plan it's going to get you in front of the audience that you're hoping to reach. So there's a lot of different components there. I think what I would point out and what I find so interesting is if you break that down even further, there's a whole lot of data sets. There's a lot of different data that's both structured and unstructured across that workflow. So if you want to take a step back, you could almost think of that strategic brief as a data input, right?
Mhm.
From there, you are basically trying to understand, okay, what creative asset am I going to be using against that audience? That's unstructured data. It's the images, it's the video, it's um, out of home that you might be doing. That's all unstructured. And then when you're looking at the media buy, that is also like structured data to some extent. So you've got a lot of data inputs across systems, but we're not always bringing all of that context together in order to get a complete read in many ways, in my mind.
Context is a sensitive word these days, and because people keep using it around AI. They're like, "Oh, AI needs context." So, okay, so the point about the data is exactly the next thing I wanted to talk about. So there's all this data, right? So there's in so many different places the data of what we've tried in the past and worked or didn't, or what these agencies know that works or doesn't,
Yep.
or those who own the pipes, they have data. People have data in their mind, some one way or another in their head. So is it right? Is now basically the situation right now is the data is everywhere. Different entities have different parts of the data, different parts of the puzzle, and nobody's connecting the puzzle yet. Is that sort of the situation right now?
That is absolutely my perspective, especially on
Okay.
the brand side. I think we're a little more advanced and mature on the performance marketing side because that historically has been so data driven. That said, if you talk to any media planners or channel managers, they might disagree.
Yeah.
But I would say that they're a little more advanced on that end. I will say that on the brand side, I'll give you an example. When we're going out with a brand campaign, it's not like we have structured metadata around the ask. So it's really hard on the downstream end to use any sort of metadata to understand broader patterns historically.
Mhm.
And yes, you're right. It's completely fragmented between, okay, well, we have the campaign deck and we have the results and we know what lift we drove and what incremental revenue we drove. But it's not like we're taking that and then feeding it back up into a strategic process at the top of the next brief, right? There's
Mhm.
no memory within a marketing org right now that is going to bring that back in and feed it into the system, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. So why hasn't it been built? I mean, it's 2026. Maybe putting aside AI, maybe not. Why hasn't a data stack that pulls in all that stuff? Why hasn't it been built yet? Or maybe has it, but not a lot of companies have it yet. What's your perspective?
My perspective is that at least on the brand side, I don't think it's been built yet for a couple of different reasons. I think the first is the complexity. Can it even be
Mhm.
pulled off? I personally believe that it can, and I think there's a few ways forward. I think the second is a little bit cultural. I think historically, brand has always been seen by marketers and creatives as like this. I like to call it like the dark matter of the universe. Like it's
Yeah.
extremely powerful. You need a strong brand. It drives revenue and customer loyalty and retention forward, but you don't have a good way of measuring it. We measure in many different ways, but it's hard to drive like sometimes direct attribution between the strength of the brand and revenue. Sometimes depends.
Yeah. Hmm.
And, it is awfully convenient culturally to chalk it up to art. And if it doesn't work, whoopsie, like, hey, we got it wrong. And, if you get it right, then you get to celebrate the victory, right? When I
Yeah.
talk to creatives about some of this, culturally, they kind of like this idea that creative is like its little like black box and it's
Yeah.
mysterious and like only they know how to do it.
Yeah.
I was having a debate not long ago with a very senior creative executive who had gone in-house as a CMO and he asked me the question. He said, the best brand campaigns, the strongest performing ones are outliers when you look at it. I don't think we can predict outliers. Now I'm going to tell you, I took that tidbit back to Sanjeev. I think you and I both know Sanjeev Mohan.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah,
And
we do.
he said, that's absolutely possible. Like
Yeah.
if we get the data together, we can absolutely do that. So I think
Yeah.
there is culturally a bit of tension between, I'd say, the scientists and the artists, but I actually think they're looking at the same thing.
Yeah, and it's sort of the typical behavior of humans. There's people who've been in an industry for a while, they're like, okay, we know this, we're special, we understand. And then the people who are outside of the industry and they're challenging it, or not outside the industry, outside that specific approach, and they're challenging it, may hit some friction. There was a an article I read just last few days. So there's this movie now called Obsession.
Oh, I saw it.
You saw it? What'd you think? I
I
did. I
did.
haven't seen it yet. Did you like it?
Yeah.
Maybe
So
not.
no, it's an interesting movie. I wouldn't say that it was like something that like it was one of my all-time favorites, but it definitely like it's got this mix of like humor and very darkness. It's very noir, for lack of a better term. But yeah, I wouldn't have I don't think it's something that would have been mainstream commercially produced, which is what I think you might be getting at.
Exactly. So what happened there was Obsession. So box office, second weekend, $200 million in revenue for a
Mm-hmm.
movie that cost 10 million to produce.
Mm-hmm.
A24 is the production house behind it, and they've been doing a lot of indie, and some of those have been really successful. The Everything All at Once, whatever that was called, that was a really good movie that I watched. I think it was like a year ago. And part of the analysis of this thing is that Hollywood has some perception about how movies should be made, Marvel, etc. And then these YouTubers come in and like flip it all on its head and say, no, we don't want to spend 200 million on this thing. We're going to spend 10 million. And we understand our audience. And also our audience is very fragmented. People, to your point earlier, the taste of people is changing. And so because of that, also you're starting to do like niche movies that are still very successful, not very costly to produce, but still very, very successful. So there are people that are challenging Hollywood now because of all of this. And then they have the receipts. They say, listen, we challenged you and we did 20x in the first 2 weeks. I don't know how far this is going to go, the revenue until this episode airs, but 20x in 2 weeks. We challenged the way that you thought movies need to be made. We challenged Hollywood. And so I think to your point, like people have been sitting in brand marketing for many years. And you can even think about Mad Men, right? The show Mad Men, great show. And they knew what the man of the house wanted, and he wanted a checkbook that looked like this, and all that stuff. So it feels like it's an opportunity now because of the society changing in how it's operating, and then technology coming into the picture. So maybe we have a chance now that people will say, okay, we want to do more data, we want to pull more data and build real data stacks around brand marketing, or am I too optimistic?
I don't think you're optimistic. I think that's realistic. There are a set of conditions that I'm keeping my eyes on that I think are going to affect how brand marketing evolves into the future. I think the first is at a very high level. My hypothesis is that as the amount of content we produce accelerates, like we can produce almost anything with AI, basically. Like efficiency is going to zero. Like
Yep.
efficiency is no longer going to be the competitive mode. It's going to be effectiveness. Now, the question for marketers then becomes, how do I understand what creative is effective? We have a lot of data historically from organizations like WARC that, really have shown what's effective. And what's effective is creativity. The challenge for marketers is oftentimes that creativity gets diluted because it doesn't feel safe and it's hard to sell into the C-suite, or it's risky and so you tone it down. Or you're going to be trying to align internally with stakeholders politically of like what it should look like. So you're just going to really, really kind of water that idea down, right? And CMOs, to, in their defense, like if they get it wrong, the cost of getting it wrong these days is so much higher because you're going to get canceled online. There have been a number of different rebrands in the past. I think the past 6 months to a year, you might have heard of the Cracker Barrel fiasco where they rebranded that restaurant. Uproar from hardcore fans, just real big pushback. A couple of years ago, there was the Budweiser campaign with a trans influencer that backfired. And even further back, there was like Pepsi with Kendall Jenner that was just completely tone deaf. She was at a protest and like was handing up Pepsi to a police officer, basically. But the cost of getting it wrong has gotten higher. So marketing teams are really walking this fine line between, okay, we want to be effective. We know that to be effective, we need to be creative. But if we get the creative wrong and we read the room wrong, then we're going to be penalized. And that can actually result in significant stock value loss. There is really big pressure on that. So I think what happens then is getting that is super important. Getting that right is super important. To add to that, I feel like what is going to happen because of AI is that as we shift toward agentic commerce, the surface area for advertising and attention on the internet is going to shrink, which means there's going to be less advertising inventory, basically. That drives the cost of an ad up significantly, meaning that air cover getting awareness is going to be a premium play. That increases the pressure CMO, because if your media budget has to go up, you have to justify the cost even more, right? I feel like it's helpful to understand creative as a financial allocation. The type of creative or the creative concept that you're putting into a campaign and the way that you're allocating that across media, it really is financial allocation because you're trying to get a certain amount of ROI out of it. So that's number two. And number three, I feel like marketing is still stuck in an era where there are humans at very specific nodes of the marketing loop. And so you've still got a lot of human in the loop if you wanted to shift toward more agentic ways of functioning. We're just not there yet. But I think combining those set of conditions, my perpetual fascination in what I'm exploring currently is, can you get to a space where you have a layer, a sort of intelligence layer that lays across your channels, your audience, and ingests your creative concept and is able to predictively measure what your outcome might be? So you might not need to be 100% accurate at first, as long as you're directionally right. But can we give marketers tools to choose that bolder creative fearlessly and defend that allocation with the stakeholders because they have simulated it? Can you simulate the camp?
Can you?
Not yet.
What do we need for that? So, I mean, it's hugely interesting. So basically, what you're saying is things are changing. The taste of society is changing. Because of agentic commerce. So let's say I need a new, I don't know, a screen for my computer. So I go to chat or whatever and say, "Hey, I need a new screen. Here's a picture of my office, my desk. I need a new thing on the left." And then it goes and it comes back and it says, "Well, I've got a Dell screen, I got a Vizio screen, I got a Sony screen." And if they're somewhat similar in reviews and cost, or maybe there's some cost difference between the Dell one and the Sony one, I will pick the one that I remember the brand, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, Dell's a good brand. I'll pick that one, right? Just as an example, right? So now marketers need to get more in front of me than they ever did before. There's a lot more fragmentation. The costs are going up of placement because there are less ads to sell. The cost of producing ads are going down because AI generates everything at this point and makes it a lot easier. So there's a
Mhm.
lot more pressure. And now you're saying, well, actually, we can take AI and turn it around a bit and say, let's simulate the audience and let's use AI to help us see if this brand campaign that we are proposing that is backed by some data, but data that's really hard to collect actually, is this campaign going to be successful? So are we going to the AI and saying, I need you to simulate 100,000 people of different backgrounds, cultures, upbringing, taste, etc., and I need you to tell me how they would respond? Is that what you're saying?
At a
Or
high
not?
level, at a high level, yes, it's a little more nuanced than that. So what I want to share with you is, like, we already have, and there's a couple different startups and companies that do this. We already
Hmm.
have the ability of running product concepts or consumer research against synthetic audiences. Synthetic audiences already exist. What I am
Hmm.
suggesting is that the next level up is going to be synthetic channels. Instead of spending the media money, why don't we simulate channels and combine synthetic channels, synthetic audiences, and your creative to understand how the campaign might actually perform before before you actually pay for it and run it. If you can do that in a matter of minutes and understand,
Insane.
yeah, exactly. Especially because the other provocation I will give you, and I like this analogy a lot for folks in the data world. The data world is really bifurcated into two segments. There's AI and BI, right?
Hmm.
AI means agents are making decisions based on data. BI is data that's fed to humans to make decisions, right?
Right. Yep.
We've really bifurcated. Marketing is doing the exact same thing. As we move forward, we're increasingly going to have to design marketing assets that are designed to be put in front of humans to provoke an emotional response, to persuade. And we're going to have other techniques and other channels to structure data for agents who are going to be curating purchasing decisions for consumers. So you're
Hmm.
absolutely right when you say that the future is most likely something where I'm looking for a recommendation around a new suitcase. I'm going to prompt my favorite, LLM. It could be
Yeah.
Claude, it could be AI, it could be Perplexity. I'm going to prompt that. It's going to give me a curated set of recommendations based on what it knows about me. But maybe I've heard of, I don't know, Away before. And something about that brand that I've seen kind of speaks to me. So I'm going to shortlist and cut to that and purchase that. So
Yeah.
AI is, I think, really moving into a space where it's going to remove the mental load of looking at the option set, the consideration set, but it's really that last mile awareness that's going to drive preference and like purchase, basically.
Yeah. It reminds me, it's somewhat parallel, but with kids, for example, a lot of companies feel that they need to market to the kids and to the parents
Yep.
somewhat separately, right? Because the kid wants it, and then they go to their mom or dad and say, "Hey, I want to buy this," and the mom and dad need to look at it and say, "Okay, this is good. This is a good thing for them to buy," right? So here, AI versus the human, and they're part of the decision making. So, okay, so there's a lack of data, but some are starting to collect the data. AI
Mhm.
is generating content at a much higher pace we ever could before. All these societal and technological changes, the way people are purchasing things, etc. Now, let's think about the brand marketer that is working 5 years from now.
Mhm.
The Lindsay of 5 years from now, let's say, that is
Mhm.
that is working on a campaign. It's 2031. How are they
Hmm.
doing their job?
I would hope that brand marketers become systems designers and architects of strategy using AI tools to move faster against specific subsegments of audience. I think that the era of mass market campaigns, the glory days of that were it was the Mad Men era, essentially, and
Mhm.
they to some extent. That I think is fading into the background somewhat. I don't think it'll go away entirely, but by and large, I think we're moving into an era in which we're going after smaller segments of audiences with more personalized messages at a faster rate and iterating on those a whole lot quicker and course correcting a lot quicker. Right now, when you launch a campaign into the market, once it's launched, you really can't change that Super Bowl spot. If it's
Yep.
launched, it's launched. It's out there,
Yep.
which is why you have to be sure that it's locked, right? For other campaigns, there might be a way to target different subsegments of audience and iterate on that. So what I see is moving into more of an agentic loop. We use structured data as a brief. We pull in the context about the audience that we know. We pull external context about the audience we're going after. We look at our product. How can we position it? What do we need the message to be? We input that into a system. We work with our internal creative team. That creative team is going to use AI tools to generate the creative. They're going to generate 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 options. We're going to test those in a simulation. We're going to run each of those 10 options against our simulator, our media plan, our synthetic channels. We're going to see what that lift is. And based on the projected lift and trade offs of all of those different options, our marketer is going to choose the one that strategically they think is going to meet the business objectives, right? But you're doing that at a much faster clip. Right now, from internal brief to creative production to media launch to getting the final result, those are months long cycles. That can easily be 6 to 8 months, depending on the size of a campaign. Really slow, I think, for where we're headed. And so the
Mhm.
question becomes, where does it make sense to take the human a little bit more out of the loop? And where does it make sense to keep them? And what kinds of agentic systems do you need in order to do that effectively? It's my perspective.
So, well, a typical brand marketer, let's say an individual contributor that's managing a campaign directly. How many
I
campaigns can they manage in parallel today?
think that depends a little bit on seniority and like the size of the campaign.
Mhm.
Typically, a brand manager today is going to also be a project manager to some extent.
Yep.
I'd say a mid tier campaign, probably two. A Super Bowl level campaign, it's really only one. It's one for probably about 6 to 8 months, depending.
And do you think that such a person 5 years from now would be managing 20, 40? Or is it just, from 2 to 4? What do you think? How big do you think it's gonna be, that gap? And I know it's 5 years, crystal ball, we barely know what's gonna happen in 6 months, but if you looked at it, because they build a system you're talking about. They're generating all these variations of campaigns. They're all running it through all these test systems and getting the feedback and deciding on the lift. Does that mean now that they're going to be running 10 times the number of campaigns because society is fragmenting anyway and now you need to run more campaigns? Or do you think they're still going to be running, 2 to 4 mid-size campaigns per person?
Let me rephrase that for you because I don't know if the question is actually how much can one person absorb. I wonder if
Okay.
the question is more, what does that unlock for the business? So, in every consumer marketing organization I have worked at, there have always been trade offs in terms of audience. I'll give you an example. One day we might want to go after students,
Mhm.
but we have to trade off with caregivers. We might want to go after, premium consumers, but that means we trade off with our lower, like our more value conscious segment, right? You're constantly having to make trade offs about the audiences you go after because it's a resourcing question. It's not just the human resourcing, it's the budget and the spend that you're going to put into the creative, right? So you're constantly making those trade-offs. I want you to imagine a world where consumer marketing organizations in particular no longer have to make those trade-offs. They can go after every segment at once. They can do it at speed, and they can do it with effectiveness because they have new tools to do it. That opens up, I think, revenue potential to a much higher extent. And I think it's a more interesting question than just looking at the brand marketer themselves and saying, how much can they absorb? I don't quite know how much we can push that. I would say I would roughly think we could double it, but I think that depends on how good the tools are, how much we trust them, number one, and the infrastructure that we build around that.
Okay. So we can try more things or more, less trade-offs. All these
Mhm.
automated systems for evaluating the content, the campaign, the creative, all that stuff,
Mhm.
running more of them. So, and then we also have the data to back it, right? Because more of the data was brought together.
Yep.
Now, imagine I play this episode, this podcast episode, back to Lindsay of 2031. And let's imagine for a second that it didn't work out. It didn't pan out what you just said. Lindsay
Mhm.
of 2031, what do you think she will say that Lindsay of 2026 was too optimistic about? What do you think she's going to point at and be like, you thought this is going to happen, but it didn't because ABC? What do you think about that?
Yeah. My hunch is going to be that it was because of the data architecture and data quality that
Okay.
marketing has available. I think even now, basically on core business, a lot of folks working in AI, data observable, in the data space in general at all, I think we all understand that there are some ceilings, right? Like you
Hmm.
said, the hot conversation right now in the data world is semantic graphs and context. One, people don't seem to be aligned on what that actually means.
Yep.
Thanks, Andrew, for the great article. And two, we just haven't even built that context graph. Like it just isn't quite there yet. So that's even with core business. That's like looking at core transactions, churn, acquisition, lifetime value, core business metrics. Marketing is downstream of that because marketing is always like second sister to the core
All right.
business. So until we've sort of nailed that portion upstream for the business, it doesn't make sense to invest those data resources on the marketing side. That said, marketing traditionally has been perceived as a cost center. It's really when a CFO tends to look, a lot of them, I'm not saying all of them, they see marketing as a cost center. So typically when you have to trim back, marketing is one of the first realms where you cut. You cut media spend, you cut headcount, et cetera. And so maybe there's an argument to be made there that, data infra should be invested in marketing in order to get to some of that streamlined operational value, I should say.
So,
But
so what you're
I
saying it, yeah, go ahead. Continue.
I
Sorry.
I was gonna say, like, if I worry about something, I worry about the type of data we're collecting. Quite frankly, again, I don't think we collect anything on the brand asset side. We're just kind of putting stuff into pipes, and the data might live with actual media planners that are external to the company. I worry about the quality of the data. Is it, technical? There's technical accuracy, and then there's business context on top of that, right? And then I worry about after that, like, can you then build the
So lack of data collection. So the fact that again in 2026 data is pretty limited for brand marketing, and so that might be a big challenge of still not doing that 5 years from now. Still, we don't have enough data. It's not getting prioritized, and then do we actually understand the data, especially since it's across so many different channels or pipes that makes it
Yeah.
really hard to collect.
Yeah, well, I think we're good at one thing, which is like we're good at the results, right? We
Hmm.
always know what the outputs of the campaign were. What like we look at IROAS, we look at all kinds of different things.
Hmm.
So we have the outputs, but those outputs aren't necessarily structured, or nor may they be the right bits of information for you to make a better decision next time,
Hmm.
right? That's where I think we're lacking right now.
Yeah. Okay. So it's something I really, really hope gets addressed and resolved over time because it just makes sense that it should, at least to some extent. Maybe it does require some marketers that look at things differently, less of the dark matter, as you said, and more of the we need to bring data in and we need to make data based decisions. Uh,
Yeah. Thing I could point out, interestingly enough, we had
Mhm.
marketing offsite in Santa Monica with Instacart not long ago. One of our guest speakers was the chief media officer of Liquid Death. So Liquid Death is privately held. They're kind of known for being a viral internet sensation, but their chief media officer is actually a trained engineer who works with data and software. And so he has a very systems approach to like, what's the creative that we're putting in and like, how am I actually tracing this? And, he speaks technically, he's got technical fluency that helps him to come sometimes to Instacart because Liquid Death also advertises on Instacart. But to say like, hey, we should ingest these logs so we get this amount of information, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a number of different voices in the marketing world who are increasingly pushing for marketers that also have systems thinking and engineering thinking, which is really interesting. Yeah, we'll see how that goes.
It's been working well for them. I mean, it's canned water, and they make $300 million a year, valued in the billions. Canned water, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Which,
And
from a marketing perspective, water is one of the hardest products you could market because it is a commodity. And so what you're
yeah,
selling really is the brand.
yeah, yeah. No, it's crazy. Like I see people drinking Liquid Death, and I'm like, why are you drinking that versus any other water? Like, I don't know. I like the holding the can, the name on it, the perception, what I think when I'm holding the can. There's
Yeah.
so many options out there. Granted, many of them are plastic. So maybe people are saying, well, instead of plastic, I'll use a can. The can can get recycled a lot easier. Fine. But I've been asking people because I mean, it's great. I drink Liquid Death just like the others, but I'm always curious about it because to your point, it's a commodity. Water is a commodity. And if the water is the same in all of these and it's not a price thing, then how you do it? And the fact that,
Yeah.
they
But
think about engineering ways, it's important.
that right there is the dark matter of the brand universe. That is the
Yes.
power of a brand, right? So
Crazy.
they have succeeded in creating preference and
Yeah.
fame with a lot of different consumers.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how it goes back there. We can talk about AI and data and everything, and then it goes back to the dark matter of it all. Okay. So one thing I always like to do at the end of these episodes, because we can we can continue talking about this forever. And I'm really, really interested in how you've been describing this. What I do towards the end is this lightning round. I'm going to ask you a few questions. You need to answer as quickly as you can and then explain your answer. Okay.
Okay, cool.
So AI tool you can't live without.
Oh gosh, I'm a Claude junkie. Like I really am. Don't
Why?
tell my friends at OpenAI.
Why, Claude?
Uh, I think it was a few weeks ago. I know that they go back and forth, but like there was just a big leap in quality I felt with Claude. And it's hard once you're habituated to like want to break and then transfer back over. And I'd say also like we use Claude internally at Instacart. So I like the familiarity of having the same tool between my private life and my personal life. I obviously switch into my personal account when I'm doing personal stuff. But yeah, it's the continuity between the two experiences.
Speaking of brand, the Claude brand is very different to the ChatGPT brand. Like,
Whew.
the orange, the how they write things, the font, the whimsical words that they use when Claude is thinking versus Chat that is very pragmatic. What's your opinion of that?
Oh man, I have an opinion for sure. So what's really interesting when you have any form of consumer research or you're in like consumer marketing is
Mhm.
get down to brass tacks. Consumers are really polarized by AI right now. And I'm not talking about like people like you and me that are in San Francisco. We're in a
Yeah.
bubble. Like
Yeah.
we're not afraid of AI because it's so normal to us and we're, I'd say, early adopters. But the majority of Americans are both intrigued and terrified. They're
Mhm.
intrigued small level things like, oh, I want a grocery list, or I want to know how to respond to this text message, you know, to this cute person that I spoke to. Like those little things, those small tasks, they feel fun. But the idea that AI could take your job is like really, really terrifying. So consumers are fearful of AI in many ways. One of the
Mhm.
best ways to get folks to not be fearful is to package it as human, to make it
Mhm.
feel anthropomorphic, because then it feels less threatening, right? And so I think what Claude and Anthropic are doing is they're executing a brilliant brand strategy around positioning this tool as
Yeah.
human, which is
Yep.
literally in their name, right?
Mhm.
And showing that this is not something scary and it's something that you can interact with and adopt, right? It's a very different positioning than an open AI.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of shots fired between those two groups for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think even that little orange thing that, the Claude is, even that is like, you look at it like, oh, that's really cute, that thing. And, you're not thinking about the billions of parameters behind the scenes that are calculating your request right now, working on it. You're just like, oh, this is literally fine. He's like, I'm percolating. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. They've also
Mhm.
got some pretty darn good product marketers. They've been doing some interesting
Yeah.
things in their chat for sure.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it's amazing to see. An AI myth you'd bust in one sentence.
An AI myth I would bust. I don't think, and obviously, like Silicon Valley CEOs have been coming out and saying this, I don't think we're looking at a jobs apocalypse in the
Hmm.
next 5 years. I think the reason for that the general public doesn't know is that when you look at the AI supply chain, from energy to infrastructure in the form of data centers and compute, all the way through to like the models and the end products, it feels like we're hitting a ceiling. The reason we're hitting a ceiling is
Hmm.
because we're simply, and I think the projection is like in 2027, we're just not going to have the compute capacity. So
Hmm.
what's really interesting is the time frames between energy and infrastructure versus the speed at which models evolve are vastly different. Energy and
Hmm.
data, those are decades. Models can evolve in a matter of days. So
Hmm.
getting that all to align is extremely challenging. And I think we're going to start to see some of the compute constraints very, very, very shortly here.
Interesting. I have a theory that more of the AI compute is going to move on to our own computers.
Yep.
Google's trying it. Google, if you're a Chrome user, you got a 4 billion, not 4 billion per hour. I don't remember how big it was, but I think it's using like 4 gigabytes of your RAM or something like that, or maybe it's the 4 billion. But
Yep.
essentially, they're starting to push stuff onto you.
Yep.
Even my coding agents are starting to use some local models in order
Mhm.
to reduce costs, so I don't need to pay for tokens, for simpler tasks, but
Yep.
also because of these loads. So, it'll be interesting. I think some of that the ceiling is for sure there. I agree with you 100%. I think part of it, they're gonna start pushing more workloads onto our own laptops. The number of GPUs per, let's say, MacBook, and I use Mac, so per MacBook just keeps going up, and I think
Yep.
that's gonna help alleviate some of that. But for sure, there's gonna be, the ceiling is coming. So there's but are you thinking, so what you're saying is the job replacement is gonna be constrained by how much we can compute and run these AIs? So that's what's limiting the replacement of jobs, is what you're saying?
It's not the only thing. I think there's a couple different things going on. There's definitely some recalibration going on. I think you've probably seen a lot of CTOs here in San Francisco are stepping out and saying, hey, I burned through my token budget for the entire year in 3 months.
Yep. Yep.
Uber's obviously the most famous one because that's been
Yeah.
circulating all thin, but there is that constraint. So the cost for companies is
Mhm.
really, really hard. The economics of it are hard to make sense. I think the
Mhm.
other thing is like you're seeing CEOs that laid off thinking that they could replace certain roles fully with AI and they're realizing that they can't.
Yeah.
I think a positive example of a company that's done really well around this is IKEA. So IKEA
Mhm.
like retrained a lot of their customer support that was sort of replaced by agents. They trained them to become interior designers. And so they basically created a new business line with the
Mhm.
folks that were displaced in some ways by AI. And so I really am excited to see in the longer term, like what kinds of opportunities does this open for business when you get creative around what you do with the folks instead of just cutting with blunt force, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and that, by the way, also creates a bit of a cycle, because if you now have interior designers that are cheaper for the
Yep.
consumer to interact with,
Mm.
there are going to be more designed homes, and designed homes require more specific lamps and, specific couches and things like that. So it's going to actually generate more activity in the economy by opening up things that people couldn't do before, at least not, the let's say the full general public.
Well, and think about it too. Like that role is probably a role that while you could in theory outsource it to AI, you could probably create an AI to
Yeah.
like, model people's
Yeah.
living rooms. But at the end of
Yeah.
the day, like you want to be reassured by a human being that what you're buying is actually going to work in your space. So the product there is actually trust. It's
Yeah.
not just the human interaction, it's trust that comes from that interaction. So I think they did a brilliant job with that. I'd love to see more of it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Okay. One last thing. So, other than what you talked about from a brand marketing perspective, et cetera, what is one prediction for AI in the next 5 years? And
Ooh, that's
and it
really
feels
tough.
like an eternity at 5 years, but give it a try.
I've been paying a bit of attention to the chatter around Yan LeCun and like physical AI because he's really interesting. He talks a lot about how our current models they're large language semantic models, right?
Hmm.
But it's not reinforcement learning. So I'm really interested to see what he does with both physical space and reinforcement learning because I think his question is, can I get machines to learn in the same way that humans learn, which is by trial and error, right?
Hmm.
So I think if we can get the compute right and we start seeing models that work on spatial and those elements, that's when you start unlocking a future that looks like the Jetsons, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I think the bigger question is, how do you do that in a way that doesn't completely destroy the planet, right?
Mhm. Yes.
Which maybe we can use AI to solve that one too. Like,
Yeah.
because I think that's definitely a question in a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, for sure it is. Amazing. So I really, really enjoyed this, we kind of went here from the brand marketing through all these crazy stories and how things are happening and what the future holds for us. So it's very, very exciting. And I'm very, very happy that Lindsay, that you can join me today and for the audience to be able to listen to your perspective.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And like I said, I'll be hopefully be around for that as a marketer. I
Hmm.
love working in tech. And when you work on tech products as a marketer, you're really working on behavioral change. And
Hmm.
so as we continue to see the consumer landscape evolve, faced with these technologies, there's just so much more to do. I'm very excited.
Yep, me too. Me too. For those listening, please remember to like and subscribe. If you like this episode, of course. If you didn't, you don't have to. And we will see you at our next episode. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day. Bye, Lindsay.
Bye.